The first time Vivian saw the man step out of the black Rolls-Royce, she was standing on the marble steps of the Halston, an exclusive high-rise in downtown Chicago reserved for the city's elite. It was a warm afternoon in late spring, the kind of day that whispered old money and quiet power. The air smelled faintly of magnolia and concrete, and a slow jazz tune drifted from a rooftop speaker above the concierge entrance. He emerged from the car slowly, deliberately. The kind of exit you don't rush unless you want to wrinkle a custom-tailored suit. His shoes were polished to a mirror shine, Italian leather by the look of them. He wore a navy blue blazer with gold cufflinks, the collar open just enough to reveal a modest but clearly expensive watch. He looked like he belonged, not just in front of the Halston, but in it, like he was the kind of man whose name wasn't on the mailbox, but on the deed. Vivian glanced at him, then back at the intercom as she buzzed for the elevator. She wasn't one to be impressed easily. Years as a corporate attorney had hardened her against displays of wealth, especially from men who thought it was a currency for conversation. But this man, he didn't say a word. He nodded politely to the doorman, offered a slight smile to the bellhop, and adjusted his sunglasses with the kind of ease that screamed generational polish. Inside the building, Vivian stepped into the elevator. As the doors began to close, a hand reached in and gently stopped them. It was him. He stepped inside with a soft, "Excuse me," and pressed the button for the penthouse. She arched a brow. "Top floor?" He smiled without looking. "Only place that feels like silence." It wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it. Calm, almost dismissive, as though silence wasn't a privilege, but a right. She said nothing, watching him through the mirrored walls. The next time they met, it wasn't in the elevator. It was at a gala held in the building's private sky lounge, hosted for a charity close to Vivian's heart, housing justice reform. She wasn't surprised to see him there, but she was surprised when he approached her with 2 glasses of champagne. "To justice," he said, holding one out. She accepted it, intrigued. "And who are you to toast justice, exactly?" "Someone who sees injustice every day," he replied, "even in places like this." They talked for nearly an hour. He introduced himself as Julian Graves, a private investor with stakes in luxury hospitality. He'd just moved into the Halston to escape the noise of New York. His words were measured, his tone always composed. He never boasted. In fact, he rarely talked about himself unless asked. And that restraint, that lack of neediness, only drew her in further. In the days that followed, she saw more of him, always around the building, always dressed like he'd stepped out of a lifestyle magazine. Once, she caught him talking to the concierge about wine pairings. Another time, he was assisting an elderly resident with her groceries, placing each bag carefully on her granite countertop like it was ritual. Vivian wasn't naive. She'd seen men wear masks before, but Julian's was seamless, if it was a mask at all. When he finally invited her out for dinner at a private dining club overlooking Lake Michigan, she said yes. Partly out of curiosity, partly out of something else she didn't want to name just yet. He picked her up in the same black Rolls-Royce. The door was open for her. The seats smelled like fresh cedar and imported leather. The dashboard gleamed, and soft classical music hummed in the background. "You always drive yourself?" she asked as they pulled out of the garage. He nodded. "Trust is hard to come by these days. I like being in control." They dined beneath chandeliers, drank wine older than her law license, and talked about books, cities, regrets. Not once did he mention money. Not once did he name-drop. But the money was in everything he did. It moved in the space around him like a silent security detail. Vivian returned home that night and stared at her ceiling for hours. Who was this man? And why did he feel like a chapter she wasn't supposed to skip ahead in, but couldn't stop rereading? What she didn't know, what no one knew, was that the car wasn't his, and that everything she was starting to feel was built on a lie. The next morning, Vivian woke up with a soft smile that even her reflection couldn't shake. She rarely allowed herself to indulge in feelings this early, especially not over a man whose story was still wrapped in velvet mystery. But Julian felt different, measured, safe. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt so intellectually challenged, so disarmed by ease rather than overwhelmed by effort. Her assistant, Talia, noticed it too when she walked into the firm that morning. "You look suspiciously well rested," she teased, handing Vivian her usual coffee. Vivian gave a soft shrug. "Maybe I am." The day passed with a quiet hum, but her mind remained in last night's orbit. She thought of Julian's hands on the steering wheel, of the way he had listened, really listened, as she talked about her pro bono cases. It was rare, that kind of patience in a man who wore his wealth like a second skin. Later that week, they crossed paths again. This time, it was in the building's underground parking garage. Vivian had just parked her Lexus when she saw him standing by the Rolls-Royce, polishing the hood with a microfiber cloth. She approached, heels clicking against the concrete. "Washing your own car now? I thought men like you had people for that." Julian looked up and chuckled, placing the cloth down. "There's a rhythm to it, kind of like therapy. Plus, it reminds me it's mine." He opened the passenger door with a little bow. "Ride?" She hesitated. "Actually, I'm meeting a client uptown." "I'll take you." She started to decline, but the way he leaned on the door, casual and confident, made it impossible to say no. "All right." They drove in silence for the first few blocks, city lights bouncing off the sleek dashboard. "I like that you don't fill silence just to kill it," she said finally. "Silence reveals more than most words," he replied. At a red light, she turned slightly toward him. "Where exactly do you invest?" He kept his eyes on the road. "Boutique hotels, mostly. Spaces people forget to look at. You'd be surprised how much beauty hides behind aging wallpaper." Vivian watched his profile. Calm, unreadable. She was drawn to it, but something in her gut began to twinge. A lawyer's instinct. She tucked it away. The next evening, Vivian invited Julian to a private art showing hosted at a gallery owned by one of her former clients. It was a quiet affair. White wine, minimalist canvases, soft strings playing in the background. Julian arrived in the same suit she'd seen him wear before, but paired with a charcoal turtleneck, understated elegance. He blended in effortlessly, conversing with artists, patrons, even a visiting city councilwoman. Everyone liked him. More importantly, everyone believed him. Afterward, as they walked to the valet together, Julian paused under a glowing street lamp. "You have a gift," he said. "For what?" "For holding your power without showing all your cards." She smiled. "Takes one to know one." Their car arrived, his of course, and as the valet handed him the keys, Julian slipped him a crisp bill and a nod of familiarity. Vivian noticed the moment. It was subtle, but off. The valet's reaction wasn't the usual eager thank you, but more of a studied glance, like he was looking at someone pretending to be someone else. That night, sleep didn't come so easily. Vivian began to notice small things, details she hadn't clocked before. Julian's watch, always the same one. His suits, immaculately fitted, but always reused in new combinations. The way he steered conversations away from specifics about his properties. And one day, she found herself walking past the car on her way to the garage and noticing, faintly, an old sticker in the corner of the windshield. One used by drivers for professional parking access. She said nothing, Instead, she started asking quiet questions to people at the front desk, the concierge, even the valet team. And what she learned chilled her. Julian didn't live in the penthouse. In fact, he didn't live in the Halston at all. He wasn't on the lease. He wasn't on any tenant records. And the Rolls-Royce? It was registered to a hospitality firm downtown, a luxury car rental service. Vivian sat in her apartment that night, heart pounding. The walls suddenly felt smaller. Every laugh they'd shared, every moment he'd swept her off her feet, recalibrated. Had it all been a performance? She reached for her phone and decided it was time to confront the illusion. Vivian didn't call right away. She needed more than instinct. She needed composure and time to piece together what kind of man she was dealing with. Was Julian a liar, playing a dangerous game, or someone chasing a dream he was never meant to touch? That Friday, the building hosted its quarterly rooftop cocktail reception, an event for residents to mingle with board members and city donors. Vivian knew he'd be there. He thrived in curated environments where charm masqueraded as credibility. She dressed sharply, black jumpsuit, minimal gold jewelry, and heels that echoed through the penthouse lobby like punctuation. When she stepped onto the roof, the city lights blinked behind her like a million tiny truths waiting to be revealed. He saw her almost instantly. "Vivian," he greeted, smiling like nothing had changed. "You're stunning." She held his gaze. "So are your lies." Julian blinked. The smile faltered. "Excuse me?" She leaned in, voice just above a whisper. "You don't live here. You never have. And the Rolls, it's a rental." For a long moment he said nothing, just stared, frozen beneath the string lights and the illusion he'd worked so hard to maintain. Then slowly he exhaled. "I'm not who I said I was," he admitted. "But I never lied to you." She tilted her head. "Are you really going to try that line?" Julian took a sip of his drink, the tremor in his hand almost imperceptible. "I never told you I owned the car. You assumed. I never said I lived in the penthouse. You never asked." Vivian crossed her arms. "You let me believe it. You built that belief. Every word, every silence, every look was curated. You built a palace out of omission." Julian's jaw tightened. "You think I wanted this? To pretend? I was just trying to survive." "Survive?" she echoed, incredulous. "You drive a $500,000 illusion through downtown Chicago like it's a parade float." He sighed, setting his glass down on the railing. "I used to be a driver. That car was for clients. Then one day a client forgot his wallet and had me hold the keys while he went inside. People started assuming I was someone. I didn't correct them. It felt good for once to be seen." Vivian shook her head slowly. "You lied to everyone. But most of all, you lied to yourself." His voice dropped. "I didn't expect to meet someone like you. Someone who made me wish I was that man." That confession hit harder than she expected. And for a moment, she saw the mask fall. Not shatter, just slip. Long enough to glimpse something fragile underneath. But she wasn't here for pity. "I deserve better than stories," she said. "I deserve the truth, even when it's ugly." Julian nodded. "You're right, you do." And then, with the night pressing in around them, he left. No scene, no defense, just silence. Days passed. Vivian didn't mention it to anyone. She focused on her work, her cases, her routine. But every now and then she'd see the black Rolls parked across the street from the Halston. Never in the garage. Never in his old spot, just idle, as if it didn't belong anymore. One night, as she returned from court, she spotted a familiar silhouette near the car. It was Julian, this time in a dark windbreaker and jeans. No watch, no blazer, no curated version of himself. Just the man behind the myth. She kept walking. "Vivian," he called softly. She paused. "I returned it," he said. "The car. It's not mine. It never was." She turned slowly. "What are you doing here?" "I'm working again. Driving for real this time. Not pretending. No suits, no masks. Just me." Vivian looked him over. He wasn't acting. He was unraveling. "Why tell me?" "Because you're the only one who ever saw through me. And I need you to know. I'm trying to become someone who doesn't have to lie to be worthy of standing next to you." The honesty stung more than the lie, but it was the first real thing he'd ever said. Vivian stood there in the half-light of the entryway, the stone columns casting long shadows behind her. The city murmured around them, horns and footsteps, and the soft gusts of a spring breeze brushing against silk. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. Julian lowered his gaze. "I don't expect forgiveness." She stepped closer, keeping a careful distance. "Then why come here at all?" He looked up, and for the first time since their elevator meeting, there was no armor in his eyes, no charm, no elegance, just fatigue and something bordering on hope. Because pretending to be someone else was easier than admitting I didn't know how to be me. And because I needed you to see me like this, without the suit, without the mask, even if it's the last time. Vivian studied him. This man had constructed an identity out of scraps, stitched together from borrowed grace and expensive silence. She wasn't naive enough to forget the lies. But neither was she so cold as to deny the humanity it took to own them. She crossed her arms. "What do you want from me, Julian?" "I want nothing," he said. "Except maybe the chance to earn back your respect." She exhaled. "That's not something you ask for. That's something you build, one brick at a time." "I know." He took a small envelope from his jacket, creased and slightly bent, and handed it to her. "This is where I really live. South Side, above a bakery. Rent's due on the 5th. Vivian didn't open it. Instead, she said quietly, "Don't come near the Halston again. Not for now. Not until I figure out what you really are." And with that, she turned and disappeared into the building. Weeks passed. Summer inched in. The scent of lilac replaced magnolia, and rooftop parties hummed once more with glasses clinking and curated laughter. But Vivian kept her distance. From Julian, from that version of herself that had once believed in effortless charm. She busied herself with work, pro bono cases, client meetings, depositions. But late at night, in the quiet moments before sleep, she thought of him, of the man in the turtleneck with a ghost in his pocket, of the man who handed her an envelope not as a plea, but as proof. Then one Sunday, her phone buzzed. It was Talia, her assistant. "You won't believe this. I saw your friend Julian." Vivian froze. "Where?" "Downtown, at the River House Gala. Not schmoozing, though, he was driving. He dropped off an entire table of guests. And get this, he was wearing the company uniform." Vivian stared at her screen long after the call ended. He hadn't vanished. He hadn't reinvented. He'd returned to who he really was. A month later, she stood across the street from a small bakery in Bridgeport. The address matched the one in the envelope. She hadn't planned on visiting, but she was in the area for court, and her feet had made the decision before her mind had. She stepped into the bakery. It smelled of vanilla and old brick. Behind the counter, an elderly woman with soft eyes smiled warmly. "Can I help you?" I'm looking for Julian Graves." The woman's smile widened. "Ah, you must be one of his law friends. He lives upstairs. He's out running deliveries, but I can give him a message?" Vivian hesitated. "No message. Just tell him someone came by. Someone who used to believe in masks, but might be learning to see the man behind one." The woman nodded gently. Outside, the sky was beginning to bruise with twilight. Vivian turned back once, looking at the building, modest, honest, unremarkable in all the right ways. And in that moment, she realized something. Sometimes the richest life isn't built with glass and steel and imported marble. Sometimes it's built with honesty, with sweat, with the choice to stop pretending. Another 2 weeks passed before their paths crossed again. Vivian had just left a client meeting in the Loop, arms full of case files, when a familiar black sedan pulled up at the curb. Not the Rolls, but a modest company town car, clearly marked with a small gold emblem on the door. The window rolled down. Julian, no suit, no sunglasses, just a slate-gray driver's shirt and steady eyes. "I didn't expect to see you here," she said, walking over slowly. "I saw you and almost kept driving," he admitted, "but something told me to stop." There was silence between them, not heavy, not bitter, just quiet. "How have you been?" she asked. "Learning to live without applause," he said with a faint smile. "Delivering pastries, driving VIPS, saving up to finish a degree I left halfway through." "You're really doing it?" "I'm really doing it." Vivian nodded, then offered something he hadn't expected, a slight, quiet smile. "You know, the truth suits you better than the tux ever did." His eyes lit with something between gratitude and disbelief. "You free?" he asked, motioning to the empty back seat. "No clients for the next hour, but the route's scenic." She glanced at her watch. "Scenic, huh?" He opened the door for her, not with flourish, not like before, but like a man who had earned the right to open it. As they drove along Lakeshore Drive, the late afternoon sun poured across the dashboard. They didn't speak much. They didn't need to. At a red light, he finally asked, "Do you think I'm still that man? The one who pretended?" Vivian looked at him. "I think you were always this man. You just didn't believe he was enough." Julian swallowed, then nodded slowly. "You're right." They pulled up to a park with a view of the skyline. He turned off the engine. "I want to build something real now," he said. "Not just for me, for whoever walks beside me next time." Vivian met his gaze. "That's a good start." They sat in silence again, watching the light fade from the glass towers above them. And in that moment, there were no lies, no roles, no masks, just two people, beginning again. The months that followed moved with the slow grace of recovery. Julian buried himself in work. Early morning deliveries, late-night car runs, and quiet classes at a community college tucked behind an old cathedral. No grand declarations, no curated illusions, just sweat, repetition, and a desire to feel worthy without performance. Vivian, on the other hand, was evolving in her own quiet way. She no longer walked through life armored by ambition. She still wore sharp suits and sharper instincts, but something beneath had softened, like the difference between light filtered through glass and light that warms your skin. The woman who once viewed vulnerability as a liability had learned to find strength in empathy. They saw each other occasionally, but never by design. It was a glance across a grocery aisle, a brief encounter in the courthouse lobby, a polite nod at a charity dinner. The air between them still hummed, not with romance, but with the magnetic pull of unfinished business. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived at Julian's doorstep. It was folded neatly in an envelope that bore no stamp. Hand-delivered. The handwriting was careful, elegant. "We're hosting a welcome gala for new residents. Evelyn at the Halston's front desk suggested you as a potential event escort, considering your familiarity with the property. If you're available, the board would be honored by your attendance." It was signed by the new head of the HOA committee, a woman named Lorraine Delaney, someone Julian vaguely remembered from the elevator days. For a moment, he considered throwing it out, but something held him. Maybe it was ego. Maybe it was the rare chance to walk back through the gates of a place that once defined his fraudulence, but this time without deceit. He took out his phone and sent a single message. Julian. Got invited back to the Halston. Not as a resident, as staff. Feels poetic. Not sure if I should go. Vivian. Poetic justice usually is. Go. The night of the gala arrived dressed in velvet. The Halston's rooftop shimmered under fairy lights and soft jazz. Trays of champagne drifted from table to table like polite ghosts. It was a world Julian knew how to navigate, but now he walked it not as a performer, but as himself. He wore a fitted navy suit, no designer label, no flash, just clean, pressed, and his. He didn't expect Vivian to be there, but as he stepped onto the terrace, he saw her across the room in a deep burgundy dress, hair swept back, expression unreadable. Their eyes met. No words, no smile, just gravity. For the first hour, he stuck to his role, greeting newcomers, offering directions, answering questions about parking and gym access. He moved through the space with quiet precision, not trying to impress anyone, just trying to be useful. When he finally approached Vivian, she didn't look surprised. You clean up well, she said. He smiled. I try. You working tonight? Apparently, I'm the official familiar face for residents who don't know where the pool is. She took a slow sip of her drink. Strange, isn't it? Being back in the place where you lost yourself. Julian nodded. Stranger still? It feels smaller now. That's because you've grown. They stood in silence for a few beats, the city flickering behind them. Do you ever think about it? He asked. Vivian's gaze didn't waver. Of course. And I think you needed to lose everything fake in order to find everything real. He exhaled, something inside him loosening. Julian, she said, turning to face him fully now, what do you want from me? He looked at her, really looked. Not forgiveness, and not a second chance. I just want you to know. I see you now, not just as a lawyer or a woman in heels walking through fire, but as someone who showed me how to stop pretending. Vivian's eyes softened. Then don't start again. As the evening wound down, Julian made his way to the elevator, coat over his arm. Just before the doors closed, Vivian slipped in beside him. They didn't speak until they reached the lobby. You hungry? She asked. He raised an eyebrow. That depends. Are we celebrating or mourning? Neither, she said. We're acknowledging. They ended up at a 24-hour diner on the edge of the river. Vinyl booths, fluorescent lights, no violins or vintage Cabernet, just strong coffee and honest food. Julian laughed more than he had in months. Vivian told stories from court that had him nearly in tears. They sat like two people with nothing left to hide. You know, he said between bites of his sandwich, for a long time I thought status meant certainty. That if I just looked successful enough, I'd become it. Vivian nodded. And now? Now I know the truth is quieter. It doesn't need to be seen to be real. She smiled. There's hope for you yet. As they left the diner, he walked her to her car. I'm not asking for anything, he said. But if ever, someday, you find yourself needing a ride, a laugh, or someone who's done the work, she interrupted, I'll know who to call. Their hands brushed. Then she got into her car and drove away. No lingering glances, no promises. Just peace. Back in his apartment above the bakery, Julian placed the Halston invitation on his shelf. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder that masks crack, lies crumble. But dignity is rebuilt, day by day, truth by truth, mile by mile. 3 months later, the bakery's walls rattled with quiet jazz and the clinking of coffee mugs. Julian had become something of a fixture there, not just as the man upstairs, but as the unofficial helper who lifted flour bags, fixed the leaking faucet, and remembered regulars' birthdays. He was rebuilding, not with blueprints and bank accounts, but with community. His evenings were filled with textbooks and job applications. He had applied to a graduate program in urban development, something that combined his experience navigating neighborhoods with his newfound appreciation for spaces that truly served people. He didn't see Vivian much, not deliberately, not with distance, but because life had resumed its pace. Hers fast, complex, defined by depositions and courtroom duels. His steady, deliberate, and refreshingly ordinary. That changed one Thursday afternoon. An envelope arrived. Thick paper, gold trim, the seal embossed with a name that nearly made Julian laugh. Wellesley Automotive Group. Inside was a formal invitation. You are cordially invited to attend the launch of our limited Rolls-Royce Heritage Series. As someone who helped redefine the quiet elegance of luxury storytelling, we invite you to join our evening panel on perception, presentation, and authenticity. At the bottom, in handwritten ink, Julian, your story reached further than you know. We'd be honored if you shared it. Avery Lynn, Marketing Director. Julian stared at it for a full minute. He hadn't told his story publicly. No blog posts, no interviews. Just a few neighbors, a couple cab rides, and one woman who knew the full truth. Someone must have talked. Or maybe someone listened during that gala. His first instinct was to decline. But then he thought, maybe this was the final step. Not performance, not repentance, but reflection. He sent back a quiet RSVP. The night of the event arrived, and this time, he didn't rent a suit or fake a brand. He wore the same navy coat, freshly pressed, and arrived not in a Phantom, but in a rideshare, dropped off with no pretense. The venue was breathtaking. An old opera house transformed into a modern luxury space. Velvet ropes, crystal glasses, Rolls-Royce models displayed under warm golden lights like museum pieces. Vivian was already there. She wore black this time. Not sharp like armor, soft like ink. When she saw him walk in, something in her face broke into surprise, and then into something softer. "You're really doing this," she said as he reached her. "Looks like it," he replied. "I wasn't sure I belonged here." She tilted her head. "And now, I'm not here to belong. I'm here to tell the truth." The evening unfolded with a quiet grace. A panel of speakers took the stage, designers, brand philosophers, and finally Julian. He stepped up, no cards in hand. Just breathe. "When I first sat in a Rolls-Royce," he began, "I wasn't a buyer. I was a driver. I was polishing chrome and checking tire pressure. But when the world looked at me through the tinted glass, they saw status. So I let them." The crowd shifted in their seats. "I pretended. I wore the suit. I learned the language. I built a life out of borrowed reflections. And for a while, I thought that made me someone." He paused. "But then I met a woman who saw past the leather and the logos, and I lost everything I'd built, because none of it was mine. And still, she looked at me, not through me." A hush filled the room. "I stand here tonight not because I've become someone new, but because I finally became someone true." There was no applause at first, just silence, then a single clap, then another, then a full room, rising slowly to their feet. Vivian stayed seated, but her eyes glistened. And when he returned to his place beside her, she whispered, "That's the most expensive thing you've ever worn." "What?" "The truth." Outside the opera house, the cold air kissed his face. He looked at her. "Do you believe in second chances?" Vivian didn't answer right away. Then, "I believe in people who earn them." He smiled. "So, dinner?" She raised an eyebrow. "As long as it's not in the back seat of a rented Rolls," he laughed. I was thinking street tacos and a rooftop view. She extended her arm. I'll drive. Autumn came like a whisper, golden leaves swirling through the city, soft light casting long shadows across sidewalks and skylines. For Julian, it marked a year since the lie unraveled, a year since the world saw the Rolls-Royce and assumed he owned it, a year since the truth, his truth, began to replace the illusion he once wore like armor. He was now finishing his final semester in urban planning, interning with a housing equity nonprofit by day, driving part-time at night, and spending whatever quiet hours he could beside Vivian. Their relationship had matured into something neither had expected. Not explosive, not fast, but certain, like deep roots beneath stone. Vivian was no longer waiting for the next twist. She had stopped looking for flaws as evidence. Julian had stopped performing. Instead, they lived simply, deliberately. Two people who'd seen the cost of illusion and chose clarity instead. And then, just when it seemed life had settled, another letter arrived. This time, from the city commissioner's office. Julian opened it cautiously. His fingers trembled slightly as he read. The Committee for Civic Development would like to recognize Julian Moreau for his work in housing equity, community restoration, and personal resilience. You are invited to speak at our annual Night of Civic Champions, hosted at the Lakeside Grand Hotel. He stared at the page. It wasn't a brand campaign. It wasn't a curated event sponsored by champagne labels. It was real recognition. From the very city he once believed he'd never belonged to. He showed the letter to Vivian that night over dinner. Her smile grew slowly, radiantly. "They see you," she said softly. "I almost don't believe it," he whispered. "I do." The night of the gala arrived under a moonlit sky. This time it was Julian who waited downstairs for Vivian, wearing a black wool suit, not expensive, but tailored by hand, paid for in full with his own savings. He stood next to a modest black sedan, his now, a used car cleaned with care, detailed by hand, and polished until it glowed. When Vivian emerged, dressed in emerald green, her eyes lit up at the sight of him. "You look like someone I used to know," she teased. "I look like someone I finally recognize," he replied. They arrived at the Lakeside Grand. The ballroom shimmered with light, chandeliers glowing like stars trapped in crystal. Politicians, activists, architects, and scholars gathered in clusters, dressed in formal tones, soft conversations echoing against the marbled walls. Julian was seated at the center table, name placard printed neatly. Across from him sat city council members, the mayor, CEOs of housing programs, no luxury brands, no flashy influencers, just changemakers. When the time came, he stepped onto the stage. He didn't read from a script. He simply spoke. "I used to think success looked like the front seat of a luxury car. That if people believed I was someone important, I might become him. But pretending is exhausting. And the truth, no matter how humble, always finds you." He paused. "I stand here not as someone who rose from nothing, but as someone who tried to fake everything and lost, then chose to rebuild honestly from the ashes of that lie." He glanced down at Vivian. "She believed in the truth even when I didn't, and because of that, I found the courage to live it." Silence swept the room, then applause. And not just polite applause, earned applause. Later that night, they stood outside under the stars. Julian took a deep breath. "I used to imagine nights like this, but always with a lie beneath it. Now it feels real." Vivian stepped closer. "That's because it is." He looked at her. "So what happens now?" She smiled. "Now. You stop asking that. You've already arrived." Months passed. The bakery got a second location, and Julian helped with the zoning process himself. He was offered a permanent position at the nonprofit. He accepted, not for status, but because he believed in what it could become. He moved into a small condo overlooking the park. Nothing flashy, just a clean view and a space he could call his own. Vivian was often there, working on her laptop by the window, barefoot, legal pads strewn across the coffee table. One night, as they sat watching the city lights blink like lullabies, Julian reached into a drawer. He pulled out a small velvet box, not flashy, not theatrical. Inside, a simple gold ring. "I don't have a castle," he said, "and I can't promise a world without struggle. But I can promise this. No lies, no pretending, no masks. Just me." Vivian smiled as tears welled in her eyes. "Then yes," she whispered. 1 year later, a familiar silver Rolls-Royce pulled up to the bakery. An elderly woman stepped out in stilettos far too bold for her age and removed her sunglasses. Julian opened the door for her, laughing. "Mrs. Cavendish, still terrifying?" "Always, darling." Vivian emerged from the back, holding a box of lemon scones. "Your usual?" she asked. "Of course. And tell your husband that if he doesn't put more cinnamon in the croissants, I will file a formal complaint." They all laughed. Julian took Vivian's hand as the door chimed behind the departing Rolls. This time, no one mistook the car for his. And he didn't care. Because what they did see, a man who told the truth, who loved without armor, who rose without spectacle, was far more valuable. He had once claimed the Rolls-Royce was his. But what he built afterward, that was truly his forever.